My name is Vorruk, and I have served aboard the Galactic observation vessel Sera for 47 of your Earth years. I have catalogued species from 612 planets. I have watched civilizations rise. I have watched civilizations crumble into cosmic dust. I have documented creatures that could swallow moons, and creatures so small they lived between atoms. Nothing, I repeat, nothing, prepared me for the human woman sitting in docking bay 9 with a cup of hot liquid, a bored expression, and a tattoo that was apparently breathing. Let me start from the beginning, because if I do not, you will not believe any of what follows, and frankly neither would I, and I was there. Her name was Dara Wolfe. Yes, Wolford. The humans name themselves after predators, and then act surprised when the galaxy underestimates them. Funny species. Hilarious, actually. I almost laughed. Almost. She arrived at Station Kelavar 9 on a transport shuttle registered to the Outer Rim Freight Guild, listed officially as a cargo escort specialist, which in the language of freight documentation is the most boring possible title a living creature can hold. It suggests someone who watches boxes, someone who makes sure boxes do not fall off shelves, someone who is, fundamentally, not interesting. Dara Wolfe was not uninteresting, but we did not know that yet. That is the point. I was observing from the upper monitoring deck, as I always do when new arrivals come through Kelavar 9. It is my job. I watch, I record, I file reports that almost nobody reads, and I go home to my quarters and eat a protein cube alone. 47 years of this, thrilling career truly. She stepped off the shuttle ramp in worn cargo boots, a jacket that had clearly survived more disasters than its manufacturer intended, and a duffel bag slung over one shoulder. She was of average human height, which means she was shorter than 3/4 of the species currently docked at this station, and yet she walked like she had already measured every exit in the room before she entered it. My junior colleague, a young Polari named Sev, leaned over to me from his monitoring station. Polari are long-necked beings with excellent vision and the conversational subtlety of a collapsed star. She looks harmless, Sev said. Yes, I agreed. Small, soft, no visible weaponry. Stress indicators nominal. Threat classification would be, he checked his scanner, 1.3, out of 10. Noted, I said. We both watched her walk to the check-in desk. We were both wrong. The Kelavar 9 check-in desk was operated by a Gravari officer named Don, who stood approximately 9 feet tall, had 4 upper limbs, and possessed a reputation for making new arrivals feel precisely as welcome as a solar flare. He was not cruel. He was simply the kind of being who had forgotten, somewhere around his 3rd century of life, that other creatures have feelings. He looked down at Dara Wolfe the way a mountain might look down at a pebble, if mountains had bureaucratic authority and enjoyed stamping forms. Human, he said by way of greeting. Good morning to you too, Dara said pleasantly, placing her transit documents on the counter. Don picked up the documents, studied them for longer than necessary, set them back down and stared at her. Cargo escort. You are here to watch cargo. That's what it says. You are aware, Don continued, in the tone of someone who is very much enjoying this, that the cargo you have been assigned to escort is a consignment of Kreth stones. Kreth stones are classified as Tier 7 hazardous material. They emit a low-frequency resonance field that causes involuntary neural feedback in unshielded organic species. He paused, particularly species with primitive nervous systems. Dara looked up at him. Primitive nervous systems like mine? I did not say that, Don said, in a way that very much said that. Good, she smiled. Because I've been sitting next to a crate of Kreth stones for 11 days on that shuttle, and I feel fine. Don blinked. All 4 of his eyes blinked, which for a Gravari is the equivalent of a full-body flinch. From the monitoring deck, Sev quietly updated his threat scanner. It now read 2.1. I said nothing. I was watching the tattoo. The tattoo was on her left forearm. I had noticed it when she stepped off the shuttle. It was a tiger, rendered in black ink with orange and white detail, crouched in a position that any biologist would recognize as pre-attack. The art was extraordinary. Whoever had drawn it understood musculature, understood tension, understood the precise way a large predator holds its weight before it moves. But here is the thing. The tattoo had shifted. Not dramatically. Not in a way that Don or Sev or any of the other beings in the docking bay had noticed. But I am an observer by profession, and I had been watching Dara Wolfe since she stepped off that ramp, and I was certain, I was absolutely certain, that when she first walked out, the tiger had been facing left. Now it was facing forward. I zoomed my visual sensors to maximum. The tattoo was static. Of course it was static. Ink does not move. I was being absurd. I was projecting behavioral analysis onto artwork, which is exactly the kind of mistake young observers make, not veterans with 47 years of field experience. I watched it for another 20 seconds. The tiger's tail moved. "Sev," I said slowly. "Yes? What does your scanner say about that tattoo?" He looked. He frowned. He adjusted his scanner. He frowned harder. "It is reading as biological." That is what I thought. But that cannot be right. Human tattoos are ink-based. They are decorative. They do not have biological signatures. No, I agreed. They do not. We both stared at the monitoring screen. Dara had finished her paperwork and was now following a cargo drone toward the freight storage section. The tattoo was visible on her arm as she walked, and with every step she took deeper into the station, the tiger in that tattoo seemed impossibly, incrementally, to become more alert. Sev updated his threat scanner. It now read 4.7, I said. "Log it," he said. "As what?" I said. "Unknown. Log it as unknown." Kelevare 9 had a problem that I had not yet mentioned, because the timing felt important. The station was under quiet observation from the Galactic Security Division, specifically because of a group called the Veth Syndicate. The Veth Syndicate was a criminal organization that specialized in the theft of high-value materials. Creeth stones happened to be, at current market rates, worth approximately 11 billion galactic credits per crate. There were 40 crates of them in the freight storage section. Dara Wolfe was supposed to make sure they stayed there until the authorized buyer arrived in 72 hours. This was the part where I, Vorruk, a calm and experienced observer who had spent 47 years maintaining professional objectivity, started to feel something that I can only describe as dread mixed with extraordinary curiosity. Because 4 hours after Dara Wolfe arrived at Kelevare 9, 3 Veth Syndicate ships dropped out of transit space and requested emergency docking clearance. I will tell you what they looked like, because detail matters. The Veth Syndicate operatives who boarded Kelevare 9 were not the kind of criminals who try to blend in. There were 9 of them. They wore hull-rated combat armor, carried disruption weapons, and moved in formation with the practiced efficiency of beings who had done this before and expected it to work. Their leader was a creature called Brak, a Mulgari, which meant he stood close to 7 feet and had a secondary skeletal structure visible beneath his skin that served as natural armor plating. He was enormous. He was terrifying. He had filed off his own identification markings to avoid being scanned. He walked through the station like he owned it because, for all practical purposes, in the next few minutes he intended to. I was transmitting an emergency alert to Galactic Security, but everyone in this sector knew the response time was 3 to 4 hours on a good day. The station security team had 11 officers, against 9 Veth operatives in full combat gear. The math was not encouraging. "This is a standard acquisition," Brak announced on the main floor of the freight bay, his voice carrying the easy arrogance of someone who had made this speech before. "Nobody needs to be harmed. I require the Crethstone shipment. Station personnel will step back and allow my team to load. You have 20 seconds. The 11 station security officers looked at each other. They stepped back. Reasonable decision. Honestly, professionally, I respect it. Sev was gripping his monitoring console. "Where is the human?" he whispered. I checked the freight storage feeds. "She is inside," I said, "in the storage bay, with the crates. She will be captured." "Yes," I said. "She should run." "Yes." Sev pulled up the freight storage camera. Dara Wolfe was not running. Dara Wolfe was sitting on a crate of Creth stones, drinking from a small flask, watching the bay entrance like she had already checked the time and was simply waiting for an appointment. "She does not know," Sevo said. "She knows," I said. I did not know how I knew this. I knew it anyway. The tiger tattoo, even on the low-resolution freight bay camera, was visible on her arm, and even at that resolution, even through that grainy feed, I could see it. The tiger was standing now. Brak's team entered the freight storage bay. "Hey," said Dara. Brak looked at her. 9 armed operatives looked at her. This small, brown-haired human woman sitting on an illegal mineral that was actively scrambling the nervous systems of every organic being within 15 feet, drinking from a flask, looking completely comfortable. "Move," said Brak. "No," said Dara. The silence in that bay lasted approximately 2 seconds. It felt like a geological era. "You," Brak said, tilting his enormous armored head, "are one human woman. I have 9 operatives. I have disruption weapons rated for Class 5 organisms. I have armor that has survived a ship fire and a plasma storm. You have. He looked at her. A jacket and a beverage. And a tattoo, Dara said. Brak stared at her. What? I said, and a tattoo. She held up her left forearm. 9 professional criminals looked at a tiger tattoo on a human woman's arm. I don't know what you think, Brak said slowly. That means... Dara smiled. It was the kind of smile I had seen in my decades of observation, not the smile of someone who is pretending to be calm. The smile of someone who is genuinely, deeply, completely at ease, because they know something you do not, and they have been waiting the entire morning for the moment they get to show you. Her name is Sera, Dara said. And the tattoo moved. Not shifted, not appeared to move. Moved. The tiger on Dara Wolfe's forearm stood up to its full height, stretched, turned its enormous illustrated head toward Brak and his 9 operatives, and opened its mouth. And from the arm of a human woman sitting on a stolen mineral shipment in a cargo bay on Kelavar 9, there came a sound that I have spent the rest of my career trying to accurately document and have still never fully succeeded in describing. The closest I can come is this. It was a roar that sounded like a warning shot. Brak took 1 step back. On the monitoring deck, Sev dropped his scanner. I said absolutely nothing, because the tiger had just stepped off her arm. I want to be precise about what I mean when I say the tiger stepped off her arm. I do not mean it flickered. I do not mean there was a holographic projection. I do not mean that some hidden device in Dara Wolfe's jacket activated a combat drone shaped like a large cat. I mean that one moment, there was a tattoo on the forearm of a human woman, and the next moment, there was a tiger, standing on the freight bay floor of Kelavar 9, between Dara Wolfe and 9 armed criminals, and it was the most real thing in that room. It was not ink-colored. That is the part that stunned me most. On Dara's arm, the tattoo had been black and orange and white. But standing on that floor, Sera, because yes, the human had named it Sera, was fully realized. Orange fur with black markings, white patches at the chest and jaw, eyes that were amber gold and absolutely, completely, without any shadow of doubt, intelligent. Sera was large, not cartoon large, not theatrical large. The kind of large that your brain registers as wrong before any other thought arrives. She was the size of a transport vehicle. She moved with 0 sound, which for a creature of that mass should have been physically impossible. Her tail swept once, slowly, across the floor. Brak had stopped moving entirely. His 9 operatives had also stopped moving entirely. The entire freight storage bay smelled, suddenly, like ozone and something older. Something that had no name in any language I had documented, but which communicated one message with perfect clarity across every species barrier. Leave. She's not going to hurt you, Dara said, from behind Sera, still sitting on her crate, still holding her flask. Probably, unless you do something that I would personally describe as a terrible idea, in which case I genuinely cannot make any promises. Brak found his voice. It was smaller than it had been before. What is that thing? I told you. Her name is Sera. What is she? Dara tilted her head, considering the question like it was mildly interesting and not particularly urgent. That is a complicated answer. The short version is, she is mine. The long version involves a lot of history that you would find very educational and also deeply inconvenient. One of the Veth operatives, a Thressi, because Thressi are famously either the bravest or the most catastrophically miscalibrated beings in the galaxy, depending on which story you are telling, raised his disruption weapon and fired directly at Sera. The beam hit her. Sera turned her head and looked at him. The beam had done nothing. Not deflected, not absorbed, nothing. It had simply encountered the tiger and ceased to matter. The Thressi operative slowly lowered his weapon. Brak said very quietly, "What is she made of?" Dara took a sip from her flask. "My grandmother's determination, apparently. That's what she always said anyway." Up on the monitoring deck, Sev had retrieved his dropped scanner and was now trying to take readings with hands that were shaking considerably. I was watching the freight bay feeds with the focused attention of a being who understands, at a fundamental level, that they are witnessing something that will be studied for the rest of their professional career, and probably for generations beyond that. "Vorruk," Sev said. "Yes, my scanner is not working." "It is working. It says Sera is registering as simultaneously present and not present." "Yes, that is not physically possible. And yet," Sev stared at his screen. "What is she?" I had a theory. I had been building it since the moment the tattoo moved on the docking ramp, running the data, cross-referencing species files, pulling accounts from deep archive expeditions that most of my colleagues considered mythology rather than field documentation. I had a theory, and it was either brilliant or the consequence of spending 47 years alone in a monitoring deck eating protein cubes. There are accounts, I said carefully, from early galactic cartography, expeditions to the outer rim systems before standardized mapping, crew logs that described phenomena that the lead scholars later classified as sensor malfunction or stress hallucination. Safe looked at me. They describe entities that bonded with specific individuals across species lines. Not pets, not tools, not weapons. I paused. Partners, beings of partial existence who moved between states of physical reality, depending on the needs of those they were bound to. The old logs called them tethered. Sev's mouth opened slowly. They were thought to be extinct, I said, or they were thought to have never existed, depending on which archivist you asked, and nobody told the humans? I looked at him. The humans apparently did not need telling. Back in the freight bay, Brak was having what I can only describe as a personal reckoning. He was a Mulgari. His species had conquered 7 star systems through sheer physical dominance. He had personally led 34 successful Syndicate operations. He had stared down security forces, rival gangs, and one very angry planetary governor, and walked away from all of them intact. His record was extraordinary. His reputation was impeccable. He was currently standing 11 feet away from a tiger that did not fully exist, and was not doing anything helpful for his confidence. "I am going to make you a very generous offer," he said, trying to rebuild the authority in his voice with limited success. "I'm listening," Dara said. "Walk away. Take your creature. The stones are worth 11 billion. I will give you 5% for your trouble. You will never need to escort cargo again." Dara appeared to genuinely consider this. She looked at Sera. Sera turned her enormous head and looked back at her. Some communication happened between them that involved no words and no visible signals, and was entirely invisible to every scanner on the station, including the ones currently malfunctioning on my desk. "No thank you," Dara said. Brak exhaled slowly through his secondary breathing slits. "Why not?" "Because these stones belong to someone who paid for them. Because your people threatened 11 station officers who were just doing their jobs. And because," she paused, "Sera hasn't been out in a while and she's got a lot of energy to burn." Sera looked back at the 9 operatives. The tail swept again. 6 of the 9 operatives made a decision at that moment. It was a fast decision, made at the level of instinct rather than reason, below conscious thought, in the part of the nervous system that exists for one purpose only. They ran, not strategically, not in formation. They simply ran, and the sound of their boots on the freight bay floor was very loud in the sudden silence. Brak and 2 remaining operatives stood their ground. Because Mulgari do not run, it is a physiological and cultural truth so deeply embedded it might as well be law. Sera took 1 step forward. The 2 remaining operatives ran. Brak stood alone. What happened next I recorded in full, and I have watched the footage many times since, and it still makes me feel something I cannot name in any language I speak, which for the record is 19. Dara Wolfe walked around Sera, who was standing between her and Brak like a promise that intended to be kept, and she stood in front of the Mulgari criminal, who was 7 feet tall and armored, and who had until approximately 12 minutes ago been the most dangerous being in this freight bay. She looked up at him. He looked down at her. "Your ships are still docked," she said. "Station security has the exits covered. Galactic Division response arrives in approximately 2 hours and 40 minutes. She tilted her head slightly. "But I have a theory that you don't want to be here when they land, and I happen to share that preference because the paperwork is going to be extraordinary." Brak said nothing. "So here's my offer," Dara continued. "You tell your crew to stand down. You leave the stones. You get back on your ships, and you go very far away from here. And in my incident report, I write that a group of armed individuals entered the freight bay, were deterred by existing security measures, and left without incident. That is," Brak said slowly, "a generous offer." "I know. Why?" Dara glanced at Sera, who was sitting now, which somehow made her look even larger, because sitting tigers take up a different kind of space than standing ones. "Because making an example of you is not my job. My job is the stones. The stones are fine. You're welcome to your dignity." Brak looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Sera. Sera looked back with amber gold eyes that held, "I am certain of this," something that I can only interpret as patience. The patience of something very old, watching something much younger figure out what it already knows. Brak turned and walked out of the freight bay without another word. His combat boots made a very final sound on the floor. Dara exhaled. She sat back down on the crate. She took a long drink from her flask. Sera walked back to her and sat beside her, and the tiger, who had been impossible, pressed her enormous head against the side of Dara's shoulder. Dara put one hand on the back of Sera's neck, absently, the way you touch something that has always been there. Then, slowly, Sera began to fade. Not dramatically, gently, the way morning fog lifts when the sun remembers it has a job. The orange and black softened, the mass reduced, the amber eyes were last to go, and for one moment they looked directly at the freight bay camera, and I say with full professional certainty that whatever Sera was, she knew she was being watched, and she did not mind. And then she was a tattoo again, on the forearm of a woman drinking from a flask, waiting for a security team that was still 2 hours and 40 minutes out. I filed my report the next morning. I filed it accurately, because I am a professional, and I have been one for 47 years, and I was not about to start writing fiction at this stage of my career. I documented every reading, every scanner anomaly, every timestamp, every piece of footage. I included my theory about tethered entities. I cited the archival expedition logs. I submitted it to 3 separate departments. All 3 departments responded within 48 hours. Department 1 said the scanner readings were the result of a calibration error and suggested I have my equipment serviced. Department 2 said the expedition logs I cited had been reclassified as speculative history and were not admissible as scientific evidence. Department 3 said nothing, which in my experience means they read it carefully and are still thinking about it. I found Dara Wolfe in the station cafeteria the morning after the incident, eating something from a bowl and watching the transit board with the same relaxed attention she gave everything. The authorized buyer had arrived early. The Kreth stones had been transferred. Her job technically was done. I sat across from her. This was unprecedented for me. I do not introduce myself to subjects of observation. It is a professional boundary I have maintained without exception for 4 decades. You are the observer from the monitoring deck, she said, without looking up. I said, how did you know? You've been watching me since I stepped off the shuttle. She finally looked at me. Her eyes were brown and very calm. Sera noticed first. Your documentation, I said, because I am a scientist and I defaulted to the question that mattered most, lists you as a cargo escort specialist. Yes, that is not what you are. Dara smiled. Not the performance smile. The real one. No, but it's what the form had space for. What are you? I asked. She considered the question the same way she had considered Brak's offer, genuinely, without performance, turning it over to see its real weight. My grandmother called it a keeper, she said finally. Her grandmother called it something else. In the old language of our region, it translates roughly to she who carries. She looked at her arm, at the tiger resting there in ink, and something far older than ink. Sera's been in my family for 6 generations. Every keeper is different. Every bond is different. But the tiger chooses the person. She looked back at me. She chose me when I was 9. Does your government know? Dara's smile shifted into something a degree more careful. Some of them. Does the Galactic Authority know? Some of them. Should I began. I would really appreciate it, Dara said pleasantly, if your report described scanner calibration errors and equipment malfunction. I looked at her. I looked at Sera, still and patient on her arm, facing forward now, tail curled, watching me with ink eyes that were somehow more present than most living things I had observed in 47 years. I said, my equipment has been malfunctioning quite a lot lately. Dara nodded. Terrible problem. Very common on older stations. I should probably have it serviced. Probably. I stood. I picked up my recorder. I looked at her one more time, this small human woman with a 6-generation-old secret on her arm, who had sat alone in a freight bay with 40 crates of hazardous minerals and 9 armed criminals and drunk from a flask like it was a Tuesday, because for her it essentially was. One last question, I said. Sure. The Kreth stones. 11 days on that shuttle sitting next to them. They caused neural feedback in unshielded organic species. I paused. You were entirely unaffected. Dara looked at me steadily. Sera shielded you, I said. She did not confirm it. She did not deny it. She just took a last spoonful from her bowl, stood up, slung her duffel bag over her shoulder, and walked toward the departure gates. The tiger on her arm moved as she walked. Not dramatically, just the small continuous motion of something breathing, something alive, something that had crossed 6 generations of human lives and was in absolutely no hurry to explain itself to anyone. At the departure gate, Dara turned around once. She looked at me across the cafeteria. She raised her left arm, just slightly. The tiger on her forearm raised its head. And then she was gone, through the gate, onto a new shuttle, toward cargo that needed watching and problems that needed solving, and a galaxy that kept making the same mistake, over and over, every single time. She looked harmless. They always think that. They are always wrong.